I have some problematic news. My recording was not on, so we have none of my stuff. I don't know that we can edit around that.
We don't need to start over if you can remember what you said and then just say it again. Hopefully, Allie can cut this together. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Jankyard, the most listened to podcast for Ashes Reborn, a game by Plaid Hat Games. And today we are talking about, well, not just news and events and deck building, but inevitability. That's right, we're talking about the certainty of the end, the inescapable last breath, the Carl of Top Cuts. And who are we? Well, we've got the guy I hate because he just keeps beating me, Killer Cactus.
I'm sorry. I am.
Yeah. We've got the glue that binds, the one who holds us together, Schmendrix.
All right, yeah, that's me, the glue that binds. Not sure I've ever been called anything more exciting than that. Thank you.
And for all of our UK listeners who can't tell us apart, I'm also Schmendrix. And we're talking about inevitability. So what does that mean to you guys? In Ashes, of course. Let's keep this loose. Not a doomsday discussion.
I think of it as a way to make sure you can end the game. You're not just going to sit there in a locked up battlefield forever. You have to have a way to deal with that. And otherwise, if your deck's not inevitable, then you can get caught in this situation where you summon a couple conjurations and so does your opponent, and nothing changes eventually, right? Once people start running out of cards and the rounds get further and further in.
The old 3-hour finale.
Yeah.
I guess that's probably the simplest way to put it. So let's talk about what makes a deck inevitable. What are the different ways in which you can build a deck to be inevitable? What does it actually look like when you're playing a game that it's like, okay, like, is inevitability a sign that you're just going to concede? When can you spot that something is inevitable, or is it a judgment call even at the beginning of the game? Like, I need to win before this happens.
I'd agree with a lot of what Killer said about the definition of inevitability. I'd say the actual lived experience of inevitability, where my palms get sweaty, are facing Mayoni decks, where you know the big snake is going to eat you eventually unless you can consistently remove it, and creeper decks where you know the value is eventually going to overwhelm you. And outside of that, the thing that I always feel like I'm most afraid of that feels really inevitable are mill decks that can just crush your soul with the framework of the game, knowing that eventually you're going to start getting exhausted, taking fatigue damage, and lose. And some of the most powerful mill decks that I think I have faced, where I really feel that sense most intensely, are the monk style total board lock kneel plus safeguard decks, which are very hard to pilot but can really make it feel like you've got no outs.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a few outside of just Mayoni and Creepers, but Creepers was definitely an example in my mind recently, not least because of Killer playing it with Naminé and Carl beating me in Blitz with his Koji Creepers, beating everyone with the Koji Creepers. But like, if you see 3 Abundance, and especially like 3 Orchid Doves, that's the inevitability. I mean, it doesn't mean that it's insurmountable or unbeatable. It just means that if you can't get to the your win condition before that sort of engine just grinds you out, it is inevitable that it will end the game. Another one is Jessa sort of has that inevitability of burn built into her, particularly once you get to I mean, it's hard to say, but like sort of like the 5 life threshold, it's sort of inevitable that as long as she's able to put even 1 or 2 units on the board in a round, it's inevitable. So there are examples like that. The mill is sort of one of the easier ones to judge because you know what the end game plan is. Burn outside of Jessa is a little trickier because it comes to whether they have the card and whether they draw the card at the right time. Like a Molten Gold, you might know is inevitable if it's sort of top around or you've seen only 1 or 2 and they have plenty of dice to do with what they will. But I can't really think of too many other sort of concrete examples where you know for sure it's going to end, because the game is very flexible and very open-ended. So what do you think, Killer? What are examples of inevitability?
Direct inevitability. I mean, you have like Auric. I mean, eventually Auric's going to get to Awakened State and he'll just burn you out if you don't do something. He's got that. I mean, Brennan has burn printed on their Phoenixborn card. Like that, Brennan can also just burn you out eventually if you get locked up. I tend to think of it, though, as kind of like what Smendrick said earlier about engineering a board state. If your deck has the capability to end the game in a way that's not focused on the battlefield, and you can engineer, all you have to do then in the early game is worry about getting to a state where you're ahead in that regard. For instance, like Smendrick said, the game has inevitability built into it through the fatigue rules. If you get ahead on cards in hand and deck, and even on the battlefield, you can pivot your plan to aiming for fatigue now, right? Because you're ahead. All you have to do is maintain the status quo, and you win. Because the other person's gonna fatigue out first, assuming you have enough life. You're not way behind on life or something. That puts the pressure back on the other player to do something about that. And so that kind of goes into that's very reminiscent of the control type decks you see that have mill as like a backup, like a plan B. Your Zookeeper decks, your Herald, the 3-hour final Herald type decks where Herald's controlling the battlefield and leaning on a mill plan. All those decks have to do is get to where the board is even or they're ahead, and they're also ahead on cards. And now they have the luxury of just sitting there and killing the stuff you put out or trading their units into yours. And as long as that status quo remains the same, they're going to come out ahead because you're going to fatigue first.
Right.
When I think of the word inevitability, I don't necessarily think of like I have to have a way to burn you out or something in my deck. I just have to have a way to get to the board state where the pressure is now on you to change the fact, like to do something about it. Right? If I can get to there and control you from here on out, I don't have to do anything else. It's up to the opponent to change that. So
one interesting point with Brennan, because you mentioned her, and I think she used to be inevitable. I don't think so anymore since the errata, because it used to be that the Spirit Burn worked on any unit, which mattered because ready spells are always available. And in particular with something like Salamander Monk, which is only class costed, it was always easier to guarantee a Spirit Burn. And as a side action too. You just play it and then you burn for 2. Now, because it's relying on allies and allies are finite, I don't feel like she has the same inevitability of burn as she used to.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, you have ceremonial dice and shepherds and stuff, but still, the ceremonial takes a power side, and when you get to the end of the game and you're out of cards, you might not be able to meditate for that. So,
yeah,
that's fair.
And it hits you for even the 1 point of damage each time. So there's a finite amount of recursion. The other thing I thought was interesting, Auric is inevitable, and it's interesting in contrast because once you have even just one concentration, then it might take a really long time, but you can get to 7.
You do need 2 because you have to. It's the focus effect.
Just the contrast between Auric and Rowan, because Rowan is not ready spell based, and so there's a difference in terms of the inevitability of him getting to his end game state, which is kind of interesting. But I mean, a lot of it, like I wonder at a very, very high level, because you were mentioning being ahead on cards and being ahead or equal on board. Does inevitability lean itself towards Phoenixborn who have a higher spell board? So Aradel being the classic, because you mentioned Zookeeper, if you can't keep up with that amount of unit generation plus her removal spell, is that a form of inevitability, especially if you're on, a 3 spell board Phoenixborn, or even if, you're using ready, like utility spells rather than summons?
Yeah, I think it is. And if you've played against Zookeeper, especially back when Philly was piloting it, he's still, I think, the best at it. And it was his creation to begin with. If you played against that, you feel that tightening, right? Over the first, like round 2, round 3, your deck disappears very quickly. And that deck particularly will spend 6 or 7 dice every round on the spell board and the Phoenixborn. So you're only playing a card or 2 out of your hand every round, and as long as you're not discarding between rounds and there's no other mill from the opponent, you're only into your deck a couple cards every round, where the other player on that 3 spell board with maybe a couple, a magic siphon or a something else on the spell board that's not costing dice, has to play cards from their hand to spend their 10 dice for the round. So they burn through 5 cards in their hand plus meditations, and all Aradel needs is a couple Ruby Cobra hits here and there, and maybe an owl, and all of a sudden Aradel's up 6 or 7 cards after the second round.
Brian and Carl's Tristan deck feels similar in that sense, with the Ruby Cobras, especially magnified, because it's so much mill pressure, but then the possibility for swarm and to follow up, with some damage and a great removal spell is sort of like that.
Yeah, it's very similar. It's a little more aggressive than Zookeeper is because it relies upon the Cobra swings, right? It's not just, I'm going to out-efficiency you by using my efficient 4 spell board and Phoenixborn ability to spend my dice in a way that still makes sense and still can control the board. It's more, this Cobra's going to hit you really hard every round. It's hit your deck and, your board with 2 damage and 2 mil. On top of owls or whatever else that they have in there to mill you with. It's a bit more of an aggressive mill plan.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does put the squeeze on pretty quickly. But again, if that only works if they're ahead on cards, right? That Trista deck has to be ahead. If the other deck is milling just as efficiently and you're even on cards, then it's still anybody's game, right? There's not really onus on one player or the other to change the state of the game so that they don't get milled out faster.
Sure.
So you have to get ahead, I guess is the point.
Yeah. I've been thinking about listening to you talk that through. I think it makes a lot of sense. But I've been puzzling over what it is that makes, I'm just going to say Maoni in particular, like a strong Maoni deck, feel so completely oppressive. And I think it's the way in which the snake in particular is so wrapped up in how Ashes is designed. Like, there are very few game plans that work if you can't put units on the board, which is the only way to stop snake from growing, especially with things like explosive growth. Like, obviously you can keep removing it, but a root armored snake against a lot of decks can be extremely, extremely difficult, absent a couple silver bullets, to get off the table. So there's a way in which, like, you simply can't play against, there are ways in which it just feels impossible to play against, in a way that some of those mill decks, like you just described, the way that an Aerodel deck with a big, with 4 books and a good dice spread can be extremely slow in draining her deck. Obviously people can mill it, but she can really slow it down. That just feels more like there's more counterplay against some of the mill strategies than against the single big swing strategy, because, like I said, it's just very difficult to play a game without units on your side of the battlefield, especially when the snake player, if you decide, somehow not to put units down, can explosive growth from nothing and deal a fair chunk of damage. So now I'll say that to Treatment's point about Brennan and the fact that she feels less inevitable, and thinking about counterplay to these inevitability strategies, I would have said the reason Brennan feels less inevitable now than she did is actually the degree of healing from Pact. The impact of her Phoenixborn ability is certainly felt, but just the fact that we now have ready access to healing that winds back the clock on death to burn especially feels really notable. And we don't really have similar the options to roll back mill are not as attractive, like the kinds of rally the troops, puts cards back in your hand, or Revival Pact to put a bunch of allies back in your deck, or Memorialize, which is very slow, it's kind of drip. Like, those cards don't have the impact that Phoenix Attendant plus Chant of Transfusion have on burn, on mill. So anyway, that's a long way of saying there's something about Snake that just feels like there's very limited counterplay. There's obviously removal, but there's counterplay to removal, but like hard to play Ashes without units.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the unit-based ones are interesting because Maoni is one example, but it also immediately makes me think of Fighting Spirit. That same sort of, it's almost like infinitely growing, a source of big damage, and then all they need is one swing, or sometimes a couple smaller ones, but they can basically one punch kill. And if you throw in Hypnotize for Maoni, or Standstill, that type of thing with Fighting Spirit, it does have that same constricting feel of like you're just trying to keep on top of it, on top of all the units. With Maoni, it's a lot harder because it's one unit and Root Armor does a lot. But there's also, it comes down to your removal options, because with units on board, there's two ways. You can trade, or you have hard removal. And those cards eventually will run out. And I think that's why mill is interesting, because you can't really recur any amount of cards as fast as you can mill them out once it gets to the end game. Whereas with with burn, you can sort of keep pace or keep it even, and you really only need to remove up to 3 cards, ignoring recursion just to stop the combo, which is interesting. But if you have like Phoenix Attendant in this case, like, most, because that's the combo. Whereas with some burn packages like Chant of Revenge, but even more so Frostbite, there's the guaranteed burn every round dice spent. I guess Chant of Revenge is, again, still more dependent on allies, whereas Frostbite's for free, but it's just like those types of things. So I guess let's talk about first how you build Inevitability, and then when you're looking at something on the board, how to assess and counter it. Like, what's ultimately, the value of this whole discussion in terms of being a better player, better deck builder.
When I think about it, and we talked about this a bit before the show started, I tie it into the plan B of the deck. We talk about plan B on the show a lot, I feel like. And it means a couple of different things. When I say it, what I mean is plan B is your plan for breaking through the locked up game state. You have to be able to pivot away when you're plan A, which is typically win the battlefield. In most decks, it is that, with a couple exceptions. But most of the time, plan A is get ahead on the board. And plan B has to be when you either can't get ahead on the board or the board is a stalemate. How do you overcome that? And that it plays into the inevitability discussion, because you have to have a way to pivot to a different win condition, or pivot your deck or the game state into a spot where you can still win the game without breaking through the battlefield. If you can't do that, like I said before, you can't put pressure back on the opponent to do anything other than just keep trading with you and keep the status quo. So when I think about that, I say, okay, you can kind of match up the plan Bs or the inevitability plans to the different types of decks that you're building. And I'm going to lay out a little matrix here that I use, but this doesn't fit 100% of deck construction, right? But it does, I think, make a lot of sense to me. I feel like you can build three kinds of decks when it comes to the battlefield. You can go tall, you can go wide, or you can go for just control. And so tall, right, make a big unit or a couple of really big guys. Wide, make a bunch of little guys and swing around the blockers because you have more than them. And control is just keeping more interactive with their side of the board. Keep theirs down, a lot of times at the expense of your own, like trading and stuff. And if I'm going tall, I usually look at a bypass inevitability plan or a bypass plan B, because you have that one big guy that can hit really hard. So your massive growth bear, your silver snake, right, your hydra stuff. That's the tall bypass things. The wide decks play better with a burn inevitability plan, because oftentimes they're wide and fast. They can strike hard and then finish the game with a little bit of burn reach, because they can get a lot of damage through the battlefield quickly. And oftentimes after they kind of do their one big move or their couple big swings, they'll exhaust out and start losing the battlefield. But that doesn't matter if the other Phoenixborn only has 7 life left and they have 9 points of burn spells in their hand. And that seems to go really well together. And that's the old Brennans were kind of like that. Everyone called that a burn deck, but to me, that Brennan was like a wide swing deck in the beginning of the game. It focused on putting a bunch of bodies out. Huntmaster, into Widows, Lightbringer to exhaust stuff, Raptor Herder, Salamander Monk with its 2 bodies. It just pumped a bunch of bodies out, swung through everything, got a bunch of damage on you, meteored the board, and then burned you out. That was kind of what that deck used to do. Hope does a lot of that now. And Tristan Fish does that, right? Like, those are the types of decks that hit you wide and then finish with burn. The control stuff, I think, plays with Mill the best. And again, Zookeeper, Herald, those types of things where they're focused on controlling the board. They don't necessarily care if they swing through and hit face one way or the other. They're just concerned with keeping your units off the board or down. And they're going to beat you by engineering that board state to where the board is equal and they're ahead on cards. And unless you do something to stop that, you're eventually going to lose. And I feel like those 3 things kind of mesh. So if I'm building a control deck, I kind of naturally look to Mill as the plan B. A lot of times that seems to fit. If I'm building wide, I look at burn. If I'm building tall, I look at bypass. And that's kind of a rule of thumb, but it's, when I don't have any ideas for a deck specifically other than that, that's kind of my little matrix I use.
Okay. Schmen, maybe what's your thought? Because you talked about the cold feeling when you face a Mayoni or a Mill deck.
Maybe it's just the eyes of the snake looking into you. That reptilian stare.
When do you assess that? Like how early do you assess it? Sometimes is it based off of the Phoenix Born, like a Mayoni snake? And then how do you pivot or how do you change your game plan in order to try and combat that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I just want to appreciate what Killer said, though. I think that I'm hung up on whether or not those are plan Bs or plan As. But I think it makes a lot of sense the way that breakdown of Battlefield makes a lot of sense to me. It's an elegant way of thinking about it. I think the counterplay, I think trying to figure out which archetype your opponent is playing towards is probably, is pretty important as early as you can. And they're pretty clear signals that you can take. So the dice color spread, like I think of the hardcore burn colors as being nature ceremonial sympathy, and if someone's running that color spread, I am on my guard for an intense burn and potentially a race. I think similarly the kind of control / mill spread as being, really a control mill spread as being divine sympathy charm. Although increasingly illusion and even mono illusion is coming up as effectively a control mill color. And then the wide is what's tricky about the wide is it can come in a lot of different flavors. Like you've got kind of a divine ceremonial, fallen / sleeping widows wide swing deck, and some of those can actually move quite fast, less fast now than they used to, but in James they can still move pretty quickly. They can also have raptor herder recursion, so like nature divine and a Xander, for example, like B. Perusis's old raptor spam decks. So it's tricky to figure out. It's not easy, and I think having a good read on the meta, especially in a closed tournament setting, is really helpful there to have some sense of what you're likely to face. I'll just throw one other idea in here, which may be too philosophical to be of use, but I'll just offer it, which is that, as Killer was talking, I was thinking about the way in which, and this relates to what I was talking about with Mayoni, the way that it addresses a core component of the game and makes basically basically part of the physics of Ashes work in your favor, where part of the way Ashes needs to run as a game is that units need to be traded. And now you're introducing the snake, which that fundamental part of the game fuels what the snake is trying to do. And similarly, I think it's worth trying to figure out how you are making the framework of the game work in your favor for your inevitability plan. So like with the wide swing deck, for example, how are you engineering the tops of the rounds specifically? Like that is the framework of the game that actually matters most to you, I think, is the fact that the first player token shifts between rounds. So how are you making maximum advantage of that? With Mill, we already talked about the way in which the exhaustion rules create that force of gravity, but I think it's really worth thinking about the way in which you can intertwine your inevitability plan with just the way the game operates at a fundamental level and understand those interactions really clearly, because you can manipulate them. And, you know, one of the earliest things, I've talked about the fact that when I was learning Ashes, I made a video playlist of all of Matt Bowers' games that had been recorded. And like, to me, he still feels like the master of engineering the top of the round lethal swing with, you know, his various knights and swing decks. And like, that is the mechanism that he understands so deeply. I think JK, and it's something that we started to explore as the three of us in conversations, but I feel like we abandoned too quickly. Like the later JK Brennan decks, I think, really explore this fascinating dynamic around swinging and then dropping cards using passing pressure. And this is something that Monk uses as well with Safeguard, using that passing pressure to basically make sure you can swing and then can't take a counter swing back. And that feels like an underexplored mechanism or fundamental truth about the game, which you can try and manipulate or play with to your advantage. So I don't know, that's my philosophical thought. It's about, you know, understanding like what's the force of entropy in Ashes, you know, the end state that the game is always moving towards, or what's the first rule of physics in Ashes.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk a bit about, you know, how do you deal with each type of inevitability. I mean, bypass, you know, redirect is a card, right? Like that's bypass's worst enemy, especially the tall ones. It's a real good card, and it's played a lot by like the tippy top players, and there's a good reason for that. The other ways to, you know, so that's a good card against bypass. I think against tall decks, there needs to be more side action, illusion power, main action, removal spell. Like that just doesn't happen. Like it never happens. Like I can't remember the last time I saw somebody spin down a snake and play a removal spell. Like it seems like it should happen a lot. It just never does. I'm not real sure why, but I've always felt like playing against Mahoney in particular, part of the problem, like part of that feeling of dread is that I might have a removal spell for the snake, but I know there's a golden veil. Like it's there. And do I want to spend my 2 dice or more just to get got by a 1-die golden veil? And now, I mean, a lot of times Ashes is about these little dice trade efficiency games where if I spend 1 die in a card and I use that to get your 2 dice in a card, I'm up a die in the round, and that can swing a game back into my favor. Do I want to spend my side action frog, main action fester just to get golden veiled, and then I'm down a die for the rest of the round? That's difficult to play into. That's why golden veil is such a good card. But I mean, the simple answer is just use a wolf and then it's gone. And I don't know why people don't do more of that. I don't do more of it, and I don't know why I don't do it.
But how many main action removal spells are there? I mean, it's where you don't want the side action for something else, right? Fester, you need to have set that up in advance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it's fear. It's sort of virtue. I guess crescendo if it's in range with an attack.
Yeah. I mean, you can do stuff like fade away and blood chains and get into the exhaustion, steady gaze, that kind of stuff. I think there's more.
That's an interesting one. I guess the reason you probably don't see it that often is because there's no merch and no catchphrase around Wolf Up. Yeah, I think if we had gone down a different road, you'd see more people playing it. I was also thinking of Figures in the Fog, which would be the other reason.
That's another really good bypass stopper card. Yeah.
Yeah. And another reason to have Wolf Up.
Wolf Up.
I guess Stasis to a lesser degree. I still think that card needs to see more play as an option, especially against some of these decks running the bypass option. But I guess, yeah, that's an interesting conundrum, because outside of ceremonial and an illusion, which we just talked about, there's not a lot of non-unique hard removal in the other colors. I mean,
yeah,
you can sort of consider Molten Gold-ish, but that's pretty expensive. And it's damage based, so it's not a guarantee. And then outside of that, there's two shadows, which is side action only, but it requires a condition. That's kind of hard, and you can't spin down ahead of time. So it's very difficult to do that.
Yeah, and maybe that's just what it just feels to me like it's easier than it is. But if like tall gets really big in the meta, I mean, I would think you can just go to Odette and Jessa and these Phoenixborn that have a hard removal spell and stick an illusion die in there, right? Even Xander, I mean, an Earthquake is damage.
Yeah.
But it's 4 damage. I mean, unless you have a root armor that's taken down basically anything. And Tsunami Shot can do it too. Like, there's a lot of those types of spells. I mean, those are subject to Fate Reflection, but, Wolf also spins that down too. I don't know. I feel like there's more opportunity for that Wolf power to be used ahead of a removal spell than what we see. Tall decks haven't really been huge in the meta other than Maoni, though, so.
I think they are getting there.
Maybe.
When Maoni was big, what was the... I mean, so... Like, yeah, there are silver bullet cards, but, like, those are... If you're going to include those, they're meta calls, and they pull you in certain directions. Like, if I'm thinking about Figures in the Fog and Redirect, and I'm serious about wanting to have them in hand when I need them, that's generally going to mean 3 ofs, because those are not first 5 cards, typically. The snake's not threatening in the first 5. And... then I'm starting to play, then I'm like, okay, well, what's the win con that these advance? And you start to go into kind of a control mill direction with the deck's plan A as a whole to support those silver bullets in the situation you need them. But is that correct? Like, is that actually what stopped those old Maoni decks? I feel like the only thing that stopped Maoni decks maybe it was Herald, which is basically control, and Carl getting bored. So Carl's attention span. Herald, I don't know.
Well, so just because it was sort of in discussion today on the server, Guilt Link is an interesting one specifically for tall decks. It does require engineering to ensure that the tall unit is the only one left. But typically that's the case, right? Because a tall deck is supported by smaller stuff, or very few units. So with Maoni, it's Gilder typically, and then not all that many other units, or if they are, could be Raptor Herder, that type of thing, just to spam blockers. And so if you can set yourself up in a control position where you have lots of ping or lots of good units to trade with, then you can engineer a setup where Guilt Link is, well, it's not uncounterable, but nobody plays Vanish. And so that's an interesting option to consider. Outside of reaction spells or action spells that you have to draw into.
Yeah, and that's a nice one because it fits the control plan, and you can play it as one of, and you can first five it in some matchups and just not first five it against wide decks where I think it's got a really low floor. So that's interesting. It is making me wonder whether, we say we're not in a tall meta, but like I kind of feel like actually Phoenix Attendant is kind of like operating in a tall meta. It's like, I don't know, maybe it's deep instead of tall. It just eats all these wounds and kills everything on your battlefield. But playing against a Phoenix Attendant is not altogether that different from playing against a single threat. It's just that the threat is you never being able to do anything, not it murdering you with one hypnotized.
Yeah, it's a big control threat instead of a big bypass threat, right?
Yeah.
But it's still...
Yeah, it's like tall control.
Yeah, it's still a 4-life body that you have to remove.
That has huge healing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, I'm trying to figure out, like, it does feel like control is pretty dominant in the meta right now. And I was like, well, Snake's not the reason why right now. But I think we're getting at part of the reason why, which is that there is a tall threat. It's just a weird tall control deck instead of a tall bypass deck.
I think the main reason that it's shifted is because of the plentiful sources of ping, as well as the errata to, at the very least, Salamander, which was a big one. And so that sort of pushes you towards more durable units. And I think we're going to see more of that with the Frostwild Scourge. Just because, nature alterations, but even the units we've seen so far, like Adaptodon being able to exhaust one or less attack units, that's a big deal. And also the fire adaptation, which is another source of ping. So, I don't know when this episode will come out, but if we see more of that, I think that does push us into the taller direction, which then is interesting because whenever there's a movement in the meta, there's always the rubber band effect of like what that forces people to start discovering or trying. And for a good portion of last year, I would say Fester dropped off because it was like, what's the point if there's just Hope running a dozen Salamander Monks and other, even if it was Vampire Bats or otherwise, it's not going to work against Fishton. If we go the other way, it'll be interesting to see how much more hard removal is packed into decks and where Swarm fits. Like, are we out of, if we're out of the Swarm meta, where does it fit? What's the opportunity here? Is there inevitability for Swarm, like outside of a killer's point, which is to back it up with burn, which then you run into that. Like, that's why the Phoenix Attendant and Chant of Transfusion sort of handles that whole archetype, right? If the archetype is Swarm units and then back it up with burn, Pact handles that really well. Now, I've played against a few players like Asterix and stuff who are still strongly pushing. I think Inquisitor's still strongly pushing Tristan, and it can do a lot. So it's like, where's the balance, and how do you build into that?
Yeah, is the thesis that so if we're trying to draw the shape of the rock paper scissors game here between these sources of inevitability, is does Swarm overwhelm most typical control decks? Is that, does a good Swarm deck beat control, or is there a way that you can build a control deck that both holds Swarm down and holds tall decks down?
I don't know. The Swarm stuff, I feel fairly okay against a Swarm deck when I have a control deck in my hands. Like if I'm running Zookeeper,
there's so much ping in
yeah,
that
I'm
deck.
pretty okay with Swarm against that. I can ping their stuff down, and most of the times when I'm pinging it down, it's Violinist or Return to Soil, and it's also advancing my Inevitability, secondary win con, right? I will say, I lost my round 2 AIL game against Asterix, and he played a tall deck against my Herald Control that was specifically Root Armored Celestial Knights, and I just didn't have anything in my deck that was more than 2 attack that could deal with it.
Yeah.
I had Sonic. I think I run 2 Sonic Swordsmen in it, and otherwise it was like I just can't get rid of these things. And I was dumb enough to Hunter's Mark a Celestial Knight in round 1 before it got root armored, and thinking I had a way to take it out, but then he root armored it, and I was like, well, now I can't kill it, and not only that, I can never Hunter's Mark anything ever again because I only have one of them, and I just had to sit there and stare at it. So I don't know. I feel like I could have handled a Swarm with that Herald Control, but I was a lot less fortunate against the tall bypass deck, which that also had Dark Presence to bypass my board, which I don't know if anyone's going into a game right now expecting Root Armored Celestial Knight Dark Presence, but
come on, bring that Galaxy Brain, Killer. You should have seen that coming.
Matt probably is running it, so
who knows? But I don't know. I'm not sure there's a rock paper scissors thing here, but
that's fair.
I think there's meta answers. There's answers that can go into any type of deck to deal with each of these things. Redirect and Figures in the Fog might be enough to deal with a one-punch deck, depending on how far you can advance your win con prior to them getting the one-punch in, right? If you have the reaction spell at the right time.
I don't think you can broadly say that a control deck or a burn deck or tall or Swarm will have a rock, paper, scissors matchup one way or the other just on category, but you definitely build your deck that way. Like even with, if we're saying control, but sort of discussing the mill style decks, there are definitely 2 types of mill decks. There's the more hardcore wants to win on fatigue mill deck where you have Abundance and Doves, and those suffer from, it suffers from big bypass because typically you're limited in units. Like if you're playing Doves, that's your one type of unit. So even a standstill can do a lot against you. And if the opponent is willing to sacrifice cards to just ping away and keep on top, you can't match board state. And similarly, if they went Swarm and were just trading and build up really wide, you can't do that. So it depends what options you're putting in your deck. Either you're going for the lockdown with something like a Kneel, or building in lots of AoE to handle the Swarm stuff, but then you might be exposed to bypass. The other option is you go with the redirects or a really sturdy unit that just sits there to hold down, a couple of the big things, like an alert root armored unit. But every deck has options. And I think we discussed this, way back during the deck building stuff, that you have to assess what your sort of plan A and plan B is, and then what that weakness is, and try and generally fill the gap with a couple cards. And I think that's the tricky part, and the part I usually overlook, where I just am super excited about an idea and I go full hog with 3 copies of everything, and then I just am like, here's my plan B with a little bit of burn, but I completely ignore assessing the weaknesses of it and how to I even ignore whether I have inevitability. It's like, oh, I got some burn, but am I actually going to be able to do anything once it gets to a board state that's stale? I don't know.
Start playing Jessa. That's what she's good. I mean, seriously, it's really nice. That's my favorite thing about Jessa is that you don't have to worry so much about that. You just got to get close.
Inevitability printed on the Phoenixborn right there.
For the life of me, I can't. I have a terrible win rate with 4 Battlefield.
Yeah, they're
Phoenixborn.
difficult to manage. One of the other decks, and this is completely unrelated, but something I just realized I wanted to say before I forgot was about Guilt Link earlier and how Guilt Link's a good counter to tall units. I really want to play the probably Xander deck with like 9 AoE spells and Guilt Link. To mitigate that. I mean, you play Nature's Wrath and Earthquake and Mist Typhoon, or I don't know, Rapture or whatever the other one you want to be, and continually clear out all the little guys and then Guilt Link the big ones. And throw a couple Safeguard in to do my wide swing Safeguard after, and then AoE your board thing, because I like that.
Yeah. I'm trying to assess how far we've moved off the core idea of inevitability, because I feel like, I think here's how I'd put it. Like, there are strong decks with a clear win con and a good plan A. I think what distinguishes those good decks from a deck that carries the sense of inevitability with it is that I think a deck I would refer to as, being inevitable or having some really clear plan that feels like inescapable, is that I think that deck doesn't need to flex much to respond to what, in response to create counterplay. Like, its plan A demands such a clear response and focused response from the opponent that it could have really, really bad matchups because the opponent has all of the answers, but it sets the tone, or its plan A determines who wins, not your opponent's plan A. Like, it doesn't need counterplay to your plan A. You need counterplay to its. And trying to figure out when that's true, and if that's ever true, I would argue that it is, feels like something worth exploring, because I think the strongest decks in any given meta do feel like that's true. Like, they have the plan A that demands a response that is just going to ignore your plan A entirely and just ask you, can you stop what I'm trying to do? And to get back to something I said earlier, like, I think one of the defining features of those decks, I'll just continue to contend, remains that the way in which they can turn your plan A against you. Like, just say, yeah, you can pursue your plan A, but anything you try to do just continues to advance my plan. Like the Fighting Spirit one-punch decks, I don't think most of them quite rise to the level of inevitability, but they do have the feature to some degree that Snake does, which is, I'm going to keep putting units that could get really big if I Fighting Spirit them on the board, and when you remove them, they just keep making my Fighting Spirit bigger. So at some point, I am building up a head of steam that's going to be very difficult to stop, and the thing that you want to do to stop me still advances my plan. It might not, be a loss for you, but it could still bring me closer to a win. I think the Leo, some of the Leo Turbo Mill decks where it's like, I need to clear Leo's board to deal enough damage to him to kill him before I'm out of cards and starting to take abundance damage, but anything I kill, there's no good attack. Like, it's gonna drain my deck away that much faster. So that feels like one of the core conditions here, is that these truly inevitable decks take your plan A and they just make it work for them in some really nasty ways.
Yeah, there's a reason Silver Snake is the best conjuration in the game, right? Because that's what it does. And it's been here in the game since the Master set, and it's always been good because it does exactly what you just said, right? It's my plan A is to make a big snake. All I have to do that is kill your guys, and I want to do that anyway. And if what you have to do you can't let it get through, so you have to put bodies out, right? Like you said, that's the counterplay, but that's what I want you to do because now I'll kill your guys and make the snake bigger. And if you kill my guys, my Gilder's going to jump in the way, and that also makes my snake bigger. And that Maoni's always going to be good because that card is always good. Until they print something that kills the snake that can't get golden veiled, and it's cheap and easy.
Well, I do think ice adaptation, which we just saw, like I was going to say this earlier when we talked about tall strategies, I think what's really fascinating and slightly scary to me about Adaptodon is like the combination of ice and fire. Exhaust the snake when it's 0 attack or 1 attack, or make them spend a golden veil on it, and or ping the small unit away with fire. It's like such a nasty combo control that works against both tall and wide. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah, it also works against Hydra and other things, like, I mean, Hydra being the main one that has that feel, not exactly to the same level, but it demands a response immediately, and it's kind of cool that it can do the same thing. But yeah, no, I think you summed it up really nicely. Like I said, the glue that binds.
Is there again, a bit off topic, I apologize. Is there a Royal Charm Adaptodon deck that starts trying to charm power two attack units and then exhaust them with the ice thing? Is that a thing?
That I don't even think you do it with Royal Charm. You could do it with Mind Fog Owl, Focus Mind Fog. Yeah.
You could do. Maybe you do that. I don't know. I'm in magical Christmas janky land, but I was trying to come up with ways earlier to reduce people's attack, and it's going to be my goal to regress a Hammer Knight and then ice adapt it to exhaust it, but that's just so much wasted ridiculousness. But it's funny. Anyway.
If we're going to speculate about the meta that may already be here when this episode drops, but for us is still far in the future, I do think one thing I have been thinking about is the way in which, with Adaptodons running around, and the way in which they kind of bracket, there is this really interesting feature where some of the big, tall strategies that have historically been strong are actually uniquely vulnerable because those units start with low attack and then get bigger. So they're vulnerable to the exhaust effects. And the way that they can hold Swarm down potentially with the fire adaptation is the space that opens up in the middle for especially knights and heavy knight openings to start to control. They can take a damage. They can't be exhausted. And they can be really, really nasty. So I'm kind of curious to see whether or not we see a Knights rise again in the near future.
Maybe it's Chant of Erosion.
Chant of Erosion.
Ooh.
To reduce the attack or playtime. I don't know, I'm done now.
I was going to say, I think, as far as inevitability goes, the heavier topic, I'm out of things to say, but I think it would be fun.
Perfect. We did
just to finish it off. We solved inevitability. Let's go around just for some lighthearted, fun. 3 of your, doesn't have to be janky ideas, but let's say 3 ideas that you think would be cool to explore right now. Do you guys have? Because I always have lists of deck or card combos or whatever to explore, but 3 fun things. So I like, as crazy as it sounds, some sort of Adaptodon, Chant of Erosion, or Royal Charm or Mind Fog Owl thing would be kind of cool. But what else you got, Schmenn? Do you have any ideas that you're looking to explore? So
I was wondering about what kind of blink shenanigans Jericho could be up to with Ember Hearts being able to pull alterations repeatedly and possibly juggle them back and forth between them. Seems completely ridiculous. I'm sort of interested in trying that. I have also been thinking about this is actually much more, I think actually a close to playable idea that I'd like to continue to experiment with, which is the combination of Blood Brawl and Turtle Guard, where using Turtle Guards to block things and then get exhausted and then use Blood Brawl in the same way that people have been using Blood Chains actually with exhausted Turtle Guards, and there's no reason those two can't go in the same deck with Turtle Guard, might be really interesting.
Yeah, I've tried. I think I've built that, but I haven't like played it enough. But yeah,
You've
love
built
that.
everything. If that's our bar, just wrap it up.
But I love the idea. I mean, that exhausted turtle guard can sit there with 2 wounds and not get pinged off. All right, that it's just a perfect blood brawl opportunity. It makes me want to put it in Rin so that you can ice buff it and then have block a 3 like attack thing. I just like Rin with blood brawl period because ice buff gives your guys more room to have wounds on them to make the blood brawls bigger.
Yeah, I mean, you throw in like Blood Archer and Infuriate on any decent sized unit, and you're gonna have some fun times.
I'm gonna play Blood Transfer too. And how many blood cards are there? Can we make a whole blood deck yet? Is that
Brawl,
how far can you get?
Archer, Transfer,
and Chains? Is that it?
Chains, and Puppet.
Oh, Blood Puppet. I guess a quick Ashes.live search.
No, and
tell you
Blood
how many-
Shaman, isn't there?
And
Blood Shaman.
There is
Yeah.
a Blood Shaman. Yeah, that's 6 cards. We only need a few more. We can get there.
And Puppeteer.
Oh
Technically
yeah,
different
Blood
than,
Puppeteer.
Yeah.
Now we have.
So there you go.
Yeah.
All right, building the blood deck. I was thinking, I don't know.
But what about a crypt deck? So it's just crypt.
It's just the one
Yeah.
guy.
Just the one. Damn. Outnumbered.
You could start on Crystal. Archer,
Yeah.
Armor, Shield. Yeah.
So you're bringing the crystal meth deck, is that
Yeah.
what we're saying?
Sally and Amplify was something I had thought about. It's just like as an interesting
I had that in a deck.
synergy.
You watched me eat shit, excuse my language, with an Airedale deck that wanted to amplify and otherwise abuse the 0 attack spirits left behind, but it's playing against a cruel burn deck.
I only half pay attention to your game sometimes.
That's about as much as they're worth paying attention to, so you're not missing much.
Title Shift and Chance. Just for fun.
I feel like there's cooler stuff you can title shift. I like the canyon.
probably, yeah.
I like the canyon shelter
Yeah.
stuff.
Canyon Shelter's the main one, yeah.
I was playing around with Title Shift and Canyon Shelter, and that I need to go back to that.
I think it's really cool.
Okay, here's one more. I think Reflections in the Water is actually legit underutilized. I mean, there's so many units who are carried by their abilities right now that if you just blanked their abilities for a round, would be completely different. And there are units on your own side that you might want to do that with. I joked about throwing a Turtle Guard out, but like, maybe better with what's the stupid
Biter.
venom? I mean, the plant biter.
Yeah.
I mean, 3/2s stink, but I don't know. It feels like Reflections in the Water is maybe underutilized. It's a really cheap way to just knock an annoying attendant out for a round.
Yeah, no, and it can be, what's cool is it can be used offensively too, if you wanted. Blank, I mean, I guess the only real negative is blanking a rooted unit. I don't know what else you would.
That's good for you.
Yeah, if you wanted to swing, that's what I meant, like offensively, like instead of blanking something that could do you harm, is there anything that you would blank on yourself to make it more potentially more valuable for a single turn?
There's not a lot of negative abilities in Ashes. That's one thing. There just really aren't a lot of those.
Yeah.
Does Infuriate add an ability, or does it just put 2 damage on you?
It does.
It does. Yeah. It adds rage, and if I just pull it up,
I mean, I'm wondering if you have an infuriated guy that you've already swung with, and
frenzy is yeah.
Yeah, if you have an infuriated guy that's already wounded, maybe you reflections it, and then you can swing to get another attack out of it. That's all I got.
Super, super niche.
Yeah,
I think Inflame is another card that needs more play.
Hard
Inflame
agree.
with quick strike units, like Griffin, or with units that have a really cool ability like Sonic, and and also with units that want to die that typically your opponent does not want to counter. So Rising Horde, Puppeteer, Psychic Vampire, stuff like that, I think is really interesting. There's some space there that's got to be explored.
Inflame is very good. I think I've only played one Frog Up game since I did put Inflame in the deck. I took Hunting Weapons out, put Inflame in. I think I played one game, and I used Inflame, and it was awesome. And I was like, this card is great. I need to play it more. And it's a bypass card too. Like you can force them to block your little 1/1 instead of your big dude that's swinging if there's only one blocker on the battlefield. It's a very good card.
Sorry, can I go back to Reflections in the Water momentarily?
Yeah.
Mirror Spirit Wishing Wing. Is the X equals the number of status tokens on this unit? Is that an ability?
No, it's
okay.
It is an ability, but I don't think the attack equals X goes away. Like, I don't think X goes to 0 when you put a Reflections in the Water on it.
Bummer.
Schmendrix is just going to spend all night thinking about decks that can use Reflections in the Water or what it counters.
Yeah, man, if you could Reflections in the Water a Silver Snake for a round, I mean, that'd be phenomenal, but I don't think it works that way.
I think we would have seen it played a lot more.
Yeah.
What you can do is Reflections in the Water a Chimera, and having been recently beaten by a really annoying Rowan deck, I would love to take Overkill 3 off that thing.
Yeah, that you can do. I like hitting Realmwalker with it when it first comes down. You just like, Realmwalker, and I'm like, Reflections, and then you just block it with a Salamander.
Yeah, that's actually really cool. I was going to say on the Creeper chain.
You slap it on the seedling so they can't pop
you could do
it.
it either way. You could slap it on the Creeper, and so then it can't germinate. It can't drop the seedling. Or you slap it on the seedling and it won't gain life.
That's interesting. That's better. To like side action Reflections a Creeper and main action Old Salt ping it, and then they just don't get a seedling.
Yeah.
That's actually pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's actually
I like that. That's really cool. You can hit Rising Horde too.
Oh, that's sick.
You know what? I'm on board with this idea, Schmen. And I think I'm going to look at some of my Illusion or Time decks and just be like, okay, what unit do I have a problem with? And then just pop it on there. Or hopefully Clue takes a Realm of the Absurd deck, pops in some Reflections, so that when he does this Hunting Weapons trick, if he's facing a Creeper or something, he's got no problem. Just eliminate the chain.
Like they go first and they go Realmwalker Hunting Weapons, and you're like Reflections in the Water. Oh, and it knocks out the Hunting Weapons. It knocks out the Realmwalker. I mean, that's such a mad flex. Like you're just pumping your guns up in the air when you drop that Reflections in the Water.
It is a side action, so if they've got Golden Veil up, you're not going to be able to do that. But
yeah,
yeah.
I guess that's true.
But that's why you first 5 accelerate.
It knocks out unit guards too.
But they really want a Golden Veil Reflections in the Water. I mean, I feel like that's a win. You drop Reflections in the Water and that eats the Golden Veil. Like, you've won.
That's true.
That is a win. Yeah. Use it to knock out unit guards. We're talking about Maoni. Drop it on the Gilder, and then do whatever.
Yeah.
You got the whole round.
I'm into this.
And it wouldn't leave the token, right?
Right.
Gilder wouldn't. That's extra good. This is the juice. 5 minutes and we've figured out the counter. Forget Inevitability. We just figured out the counter to all of the strong combos. Put it on Hydra. No heads.
No heads. You hit Glowfinch with it, and then you kill it.
Oh yeah.
The dream. Yeah, no, totally.
Carl plays his Dreadwraith with 2 Infuriates, and then you Reflections in the Water it.
All right, this is legitimate. This is the card to counter all of these problems.
I'm really excited about this because I feel like early on I really made my mark in the server with a joke when Time Hopper was previewed that I couldn't wait to Reflections in the Water my Time Hoppers to like psych them up to black units. Yeah. So I'm glad I've actually found a legit use for it.
I think there's a lot of legit uses. Man, wouldn't it would have saved you with the Celestial problem. I've seen, because I played against Matt and he played Celestial Knight. I think it was with Root Armor. Slapper reflections on
Wait,
it.
does it remove armor? Holy cow.
Yeah, right? Because the armor is an ability.
Dude, that's the Herald answer that we were looking at the other day.
If you're in Herald, you need to play reflections. That covers all the problems. It's wicked.
That's hilarious.
We start playing summon a Weeping Spirit onto their side of the battlefield and then reflections it so they can't discard a card to get rid of it.
Well, you could do that with puppets. Blood
Yeah,
puppets.
you could do it with puppets too so that they can't self-inflict.
It covers all the knights though, right? Slap it on...
Oh, you put on any knight, it deals with it for... Makes them not alert.
not alert, not a Crypt Guardian. Stops the unit guard and the shackle.
I don't think it'll stop the shackle at the end of the round, will it? I guess unless it... I don't know which one falls off. You can remove it.
No, but I meant like... You're gonna remove it and then it won't exhaust anything.
Right.
So, look, so inevitably, anytime we talk about this, someone's going to say, well, I'd rather just remove it. I mean, it's like worse exhaustion. It's even worse than exhaustion. So, like...
Yeah. But it's one die and a side action.
It's not, though, because there are some cards that the ability is the problem, right? Like you said. And if you can eliminate the ability, that gives you breathing time to do something, or sometimes it literally opens up the ability to remove it without consequence.
Yeah. I think that is where it really shines, is like there are certain situations where you've really got to remove, like armor is really problematic in certain situations. And it's printed on the card. Or the Realm Walker. I mean, yeah, the blank 3/3 is nothing to write home about. All right, well, good.
Yeah, and I think putting it in a deck where you can get some offensive use out of it, maybe that's the sauce. Like I did try it with Biter a couple weeks ago. But Biter's terrible, and that's part of the problem. Is I couldn't find a good time to play it because I couldn't even get a Biter on the board because I never wanted to put it down. But Turtle Guard's a different story, and that's even in color. Or stuff like the Blood Puppet spam. Maybe it goes in there. I don't know, and you can use it on the puppets to stop them from getting self-inflicted.
You gotta do it with the Infuriate refresh swing again.
Yeah.
Is playtime... What's an ability? Like, could you stop playtime on your own thing?
I don't know.
We're getting into the weeds now. This guy's gonna have all kinds of rule questions in the morning.
It would have to say, like, the unit gains the following ability and then have a thing. I don't know what playtime says, and I can't pull it up right now.
It doesn't say that.
Then no, you can't stop that one. But I think like Root Armor, doesn't Root Armor give them Armored 1, I think? So like I think it should get rid of that. Unless Reflections only deals with the stuff on the card. I don't know what Reflections says either.
Should we say new deck building challenge, Reflections in the Water?
I think we should. We haven't done that for a while, and
Yeah. Let's do Jank Tank. Let's throw that out there and we can review them next time.
That was on the Wheel of Jank. We haven't spun the Wheel of Jank for a while, but Reflections in the Water was on it. So we're going to pretend like we spun it and we landed on that.
Boom.
I have the answer. Abilities are named effects, and playtime is not named. So it needs to have the bold name to be an ability. So the X equals is also not an ability.
Right.
Reflections nerfs Rising Horde.
Yeah. Big time.
That one's really nice. That's a really good call.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Yeah, Creeper and Rising Horde are huge. Like that.
That's enough. Honestly, that alone is enough reason to just run 3 of it, especially if we do move to Knights.
Where was this at when Hope was around? I guess like when you duplicated the Creeper, the new one would have had the ability, so you still get the seed. But I think you do because it's a copy of that. Well, it says a copy of that conjuration, right? But it comes out of your conjuration pile, so I don't think it. I think it has the ability.
Yes. Yeah. You're right.
But still, the other one doesn't get it. Like Creeper was all over the place, and we could have just been like Hope plays a Creeper, and someone goes side action Reflections, main action ping, and well, but she had double down too. That was the other problem. That's gone now, though. We don't have to worry about that anymore.
Still, I think Yeah, it's all gone. But the reflections is even more powerful now. And like I said, if you're talking about like the Frostwild set and the cards that are coming out, Ember Heart or Adaptodon or whatever the heck is next.
Yeah, all these alterations and add abilities.
Yeah, everything that's added. I think this is a legitimate card that should be considered. So let's see what people bring.
All right, I like it.
So you go. We solved Inevitability and
with reflections in the water.
Yeah.
That's
into every card. There we go.
We're back, baby. Back
We
on the
are.
Jank train. We're writing off the top cuts. Forget that nonsense.
Got all serious for a little few episodes, and now we're talking about reflections in the water. I love it.
The only problem is, like, we talk about these things, and then I all of a sudden get that seed just stuck in my head. I'm like, I don't know. I actually think there's some truth to this.
And then you go on a losing streak, and you wonder why.
I'm already on the losing streak, so I'll try it. I'll try it if it helps. Would have helped in my last 3 major losses against. Lost to Killer on Creepers. Lost to Art. Shout out to Art, who is in AIL on Mayoni. And previously lost to Carl in the Blitz Top Cut. So this goes in my decks.
Yeah, there it is.
Herald Reflections. Ignore the unit guards. Ignore everything else. This is it.
That's it. I love it. I love it.
All right.
If you're not janky, you're stanky.
Frog up.
Frog up, guys.
Frog up.
Yep.
Have a good one.
All right, we'll see you guys. Peace.